Hey guys, we're continuing in our series, The Big Questions. Just a reminder that a few weeks ago, you guys submitted your big questions. We'll be taking a crack at those next Sunday, so make sure to keep an eye out for those. The big question that we're asking today is, what's the point of me? Now, you probably wouldn't ask it that way. Maybe it's something more like this. Why is this meme-loving, iced coffee drinking, basketball playing, taki eating me here? Or whatever words you would use to describe yourself. In other words, what is the purpose of your life right now? Now that's a big question. A lot of us are looking for a sense of purpose. We want to know that our lives are meaningful, that they matter, that our life is impactful. Or maybe this isn't something that you think about too often right now, but at some point you probably will. It's pretty normal to wonder if there's some big, grand plan for your life. In fact, as a middle schooler, I bet you've already thought about this in a different way. Maybe a teacher or a parent or some other adult in your life has asked you to think about, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And maybe in kindergarten, that was like a really easy question to answer. Back then, maybe you said an actress or an athlete or a firefighter or a teacher, and you said it without very much thought. But now that question feels a little more complicated because now you're interested in 1,000 different things. How are you supposed to know who or what you want to be as an adult? You're still trying to figure out who you want to be right now. Are you going to do band or orchestra or choir or theater or sports? And if you're going to play sports, which sports are you going to play? All of them? None of them? What friend group is the right friend group? Do you like that person as a friend or as more than a friend? There's already so much to try to figure out about who you are right now. Or maybe thinking about your purpose for now or for later isn't something you really consider because you've got bigger things to worry about in the present moment. Maybe you've got a lot of stressful things that you're trying to figure out right now. So thinking about the future isn't really that high of a priority when there's so much stress on what you're having to deal with today. See what I mean? Big questions about big purpose can feel like a lot right now. And when you step into church world, the questions get even bigger. You might hear people at church say things like, God has a plan for your life. And while that might feel comforting, that might also feel like a lot of pressure. You might think, so when is God gonna tell me what the plan is? Or do I not get to choose anything about my life? Or is it all God's plan? Or what if I don't like God's plan? All of these questions about purpose feel big and they're often confusing, and maybe they even feel like questions you don't need to worry about right now. But today I want you to consider that whether you realize it or not, God does have a plan and a purpose for you right now as a middle schooler. And what it is might be different than what you think. So today we're going to read a little bit from a letter written by a guy named Paul. Now, Paul was a leader in the early church who often wrote letters to believers in other parts of the world. This letter was written to people in a place called Corinth. In this letter, we learn a little more about Paul and another guy named Apollos. Paul and Apollos had significant influence at this time. That's because people followed them. Paul and Apollos were leaders who followed God and made a big difference in leading other people to do the same thing. Now, there's a tendency to look back on people like Paul and Apollos and think of them as some sort of superheroes of early Christianity. We tend to think of them doing things in the early church and think, wow, nobody today is doing anything with that kind of impact, like when it comes to teaching people about God. And they must know all sorts of things that we don't know about following Jesus. But I want you to listen to how Paul actually describes himself and Apollos in a letter, again, written to the people in Corinth. So this is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. It says, after all, who is Apollos? Who is Paul? We are only God's servants through whom you believed the good news. Each of us did the work that the Lord gave us. Notice the way Paul describes himself and Apollos as far from some sort of spiritual superhero. He says that they're only the Lord's servants. That was all they had to be for God to use them. They weren't any better or any less than anyone else. They just believed in and followed God. And what did they do after that? Well, Just what this verse tells us, the work that the Lord gave them. They didn't try to find a plan or a purpose in anything other than what God had called them to do. They just did the work that was theirs. And what does that mean exactly? Well, let's keep reading in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 7 to 9 in order to find out. So there it says, it's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important is that God makes the seed grow. The one who plants and the one who waters work together with the same purpose, and both will be rewarded for their own hard work. For we are both God's workers, and you are God's field. You are God's building. So we have to keep in mind here that during the time this letter was written, farming and agriculture were a big part of the culture. These examples of planting and watering would have made a ton of sense for the people reading it back then. They would have understood that when it comes to farming, you need people who plant, and you also need people who water. It takes both people doing their specific job to successfully grow anything. If the planter doesn't put down seeds, the water is being poured onto empty soil. And if the waterer doesn't show up and water the seeds, then nothing the planter put in the ground will grow. Both jobs are equally important. Both purposes are important to making the seeds grow. And who does that? Well, God. God has the most important part in all of this. God makes the seed grow. All we have to do is show up and be willing to serve our unique role and let God do the rest. That's your purpose. To join in God's purpose in the world, to choose every day to be part of what God is doing in the world. God wants you to use the gifts and talents that He gave you to do your part in the world. See, you matter far more than you think. No matter what your part is in what God's doing, you matter. Because by serving in your unique role, you can be part of what God is doing to make the world better. Right now, today, you can find purpose by participating in God's plan for the world. By being part of making the world better, by simply being who God created you to be. And maybe it's as simple as being kind to someone today, or doing your best at practice, or helping out your parents at home. Maybe it's doing your best in science class, or inviting somebody to church. Our purpose is to take who God made us to be, where He placed us in life, our gifts, our talents, and then be exactly who you are while putting on God's heart for display. That's God's purpose for your life, that you would be you, exactly who you are, and loving, kind, and encouraging, and that you would go and just be that in the world. That is God's purpose for your life. What you're good at, who you live with, what you care about, all of that stuff is part of who you are and who God made you to be. And it's all stuff that can help you participate in God's plan and purpose. You matter far more than you think. Those big questions we have about why we're here and what we're doing in the world, the answers are found in God. God is always in the business of making the world better, and we can be part of that story every single day. You are invited to participate in what God is up to in the world. Now, let me be clear about something. Sometimes we hear the word better, and we think that that means that we're going to get everything that we want. Like everything is going to get better for us if we're just following our purpose. Unfortunately, that's not always what this means. Following God's purpose doesn't mean better grades, more followers on TikTok, better friends, all of our problems solved. We're talking about better in a bigger way. God's better means kinder, more gracious, more patient, and forgiving. And we get to participate in making the world better through our love and our actions. So where do we start? Well, you can start by just paying careful attention to where you see God at work in the world. Look at your schedule for the day. What classes do you have, or what classes will you have? What people will you see? What responsibilities are on your shoulders? In all of that, look for what God might be doing to make the world better. Where do you see kindness, love, grace, patience, joy, peace? All of those are hallmarks of God at work in the world. That can be as simple as the love shown to you by your parents or a friend forgiving you. It can be choosing to think of school differently because you appreciate the opportunity to get a good education. It can be joy over a delicious meal or getting to hang out with your friends. Just take time to see what God might be doing in your story today. Then think about how you can join in on that purpose. You matter so much, and God wants you to be part of the bigger purpose. You can live your life today as part of God's story in a million different ways. The way you talk to your siblings, the way you talk to your teammates, the kindness you show to others when everyone is trying to figure out all the newness of a new school year, the respect that you show your teachers, the invitation that you extend to a new kid to join your small group. All of those things and more add up to you doing your part in the story that God is writing for the world.